Before life broke into before and after, there was a time when everything felt ordinary, and that ordinariness felt like a blessing. We lived in a small rented apartment tucked between two noisy streets, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the neighbors knew your routine better than you did. Every morning, sunlight pushed through the faded curtains, landing directly on his face. He would groan, pull the pillow over his head, and mumble, "One more minute," while I laughed and tugged at his arm. Those mornings were ours. He used to leave early for work, his shoes always scuffed with dust from the road, his shirt smelling faintly of soap and engine oil. Before stepping out, he would pause at the door, pretending to forget something just so I'd come closer. "If I don't come back rich," he'd say with a grin, "at least I'll come back to you." I'd roll my eyes, but my heart always softened. Evenings were quieter. We'd sit on the narrow balcony overlooking the street, sipping tea while the city breathed around us, children playing cricket below, vendors calling out their last sales, the sky slowly fading from orange to deep blue. He talked about opening his own shop one day, something small but honest. I talked about learning more, maybe starting a little business of my own. Our dreams weren't grand, but they were shared, and that made them feel possible. On weekends, we walked everywhere. Through crowded markets where he held my hand tightly so I wouldn't get lost, past food stalls where he insisted I try everything, laughing when I complained it was too spicy. Sometimes we ended up at the river on the edge of the city, sitting on the concrete steps, watching the water move forward without ever looking back. "You know," he said once, skipping a stone across the surface, "as long as we're together, I'm not afraid of anything." I believed him. In those days, love felt easy. It lived in small gestures, the way he waited for me to finish eating before starting, the way he listened when I spoke, the way he looked at me like I was enough. We had no idea how fragile normal life really was. Because not long after, on a day that began just like any other, with sunlight, rushed goodbyes, and half-finished dreams, the phone rang. And everything we were became everything we would lose. The day it happened didn't feel dangerous. It felt ordinary, almost gentle. The morning air was warm, the kind that makes you move a little slower without noticing. I remember standing near the door, watching him tie his shoes, arguing with me about whether he really needed his jacket. "It won't rain," he said confidently, flashing that familiar smile. I handed it to him anyway. "Take it," I insisted. "Just in case." That was the last normal conversation we ever had. The phone rang in the afternoon while I was rinsing rice at the sink. I almost didn't hear it over the sound of running water. When I picked up, a stranger's voice said my name carefully, as if afraid it might break. There had been an accident. A collision. I needed to come to the hospital, now. The city blurred as I ran, traffic horns screamed around me, vendors shouted, people moved as they always did, unaware that my world was collapsing between red lights. At the hospital gate, the smell of antiseptic hit me hard. White walls. Rushed footsteps. A stretcher disappearing down a corridor before I could reach it. I saw him for a moment, his face pale, his eyes half open, blood dried along his temple. "I'm here," I whispered, gripping his hand as tightly as I could. He tried to speak, but no sound came. Then they took him away. Hours passed without shape or meaning. I sat on a cold metal bench, counting the cracks in the floor, praying to every god I could remember. When the doctor finally called my name, his expression was careful, practiced. "He's alive," he said first. Relief flooded me so fast I nearly collapsed, then came the rest. "The spinal injury is severe," the doctor continued. "We did everything we could. But, he will not walk again." The words echoed in my ears, refusing to settle. Not walk again. Not now. Not ever. I laughed, softly, in disbelief, waiting for him to correct himself. He didn't. Inside the room, machines beeped steadily, cruel in their calm. Tubes ran from my husband's body like fragile lifelines. I touched his arm, searching for warmth, for movement. "It's okay," I told him, even though I had no idea if it was. "We'll figure this out. I'm here." His eyes filled with tears he couldn't wipe away. In that moment, fear wrapped itself around my chest, heavy and suffocating. Our dreams, the shop, the walks, the future, collapsed into silence. I didn't know how we would survive this. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same. And without realizing it, that was the moment my life quietly shifted, from being his partner, to becoming his caretaker. 5 years don't pass the way you think they will. They don't arrive as a single long stretch of time. They come as thousands of small moments, heavy, repetitive, and quiet, that slowly wear you down without making a sound. My days began before sunrise. The city outside was still half asleep when I rolled up my sleeves and pulled the wheelchair closer to the bed. "Okay," I'd whisper, forcing lightness into my voice, "let's go." I learned how to lift his body without hurting him, or myself, how to move carefully, how to hide the strain in my arms and back. Some mornings, my hands shook so badly I had to pause, pretending I was just fixing the sheets. Bathing him became routine. Warm water. Soap. Towels laid out neatly. I avoided his eyes at first, afraid of what I might see there, shame, anger, disappointment. Over time, we stopped talking during those moments altogether. Silence felt safer. Meals were another ritual. I fed him slowly, bite by bite, watching his jaw tense whenever food spilled or his hand failed to cooperate. "I'm sorry," he'd mutter. "It's okay," I'd say every time, even when my chest felt tight. Even when it wasn't. Nights were the hardest. He woke often, pain, discomfort, frustration, and I woke with him. Sometimes I slept sitting up, afraid he'd call out and I wouldn't hear. The room smelled faintly of medicine and disinfectant, replacing the scent of tea and fresh air we once loved. My dreams, when they came, were short and restless. Money slipped through our fingers like water. Medical bills stacked up. I sold my jewelry first, then our small savings disappeared. I stopped buying anything that wasn't necessary. New clothes felt like a luxury I no longer deserved. Friends came at the beginning, bringing sympathy and advice. Then they came less often. Eventually, they stopped altogether. Life moved on, for everyone but us. I became efficient. Strong. Invisible. Some days, he was kind, grateful even. Other days, his frustration spilled over, sharp words, cold silence. I swallowed everything. After all, he was the one confined to a chair, wasn't he? My pain didn't count. Years passed like this, marked not by calendars but by routines. Lift. Feed. Clean. Repeat. Somewhere along the way, I stopped recognizing the woman in the mirror. Her eyes were tired. Her shoulders hunched. Her voice quieter than it used to be. I told myself this was love. This was loyalty. This was what a good wife did. But deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and devotion, something else was growing, something unspoken. A loneliness so deep, it felt like it might one day break me. The apartment was quieter than ever, the kind of silence that presses against your chest until you can barely breathe. Outside, the city carried on as usual, motorbikes rattling over potholes, street vendors calling out their last sales, children chasing a ball across the cracked pavement. Inside, I felt invisible, a ghost wandering the narrow corridors of a life I no longer recognized as my own. I sat on the edge of the bed, brushing my hair for the first time in hours, maybe days. The chestnut strands, streaked now with silver, slipped through my fingers, rough at the ends. The reflection in the small, cracked mirror wasn't mine, it was someone else, someone older, quieter, smaller. My kurta, soft pastel and faded from constant washing, hung loosely on my shoulders, comfortable but uninspired. I barely remembered the woman I had once been, the one who laughed easily, dreamed boldly, and looked forward to each new day. I remembered mornings when the air smelled of fresh bread from the street below and the sunlight painted golden streaks across our tiny balcony. I remembered our laughter spilling over cups of tea, our plans for a small boutique, weekend trips to the river, evenings lost in conversation. That woman had been alive in every thought, every heartbeat. Now, those days felt like a story someone else had told me. Friends stopped calling. Invitations went unanswered, unremembered. Even when I wanted to reach out, I didn't know where to start. My life had shrunk to the four walls of this apartment, to the routines I had mastered over 5 long years. Lift. Feed. Clean. Repeat. My own needs, my own desires, had become distant whispers I no longer recognized. I touched my face, tracing the faint lines carved by sleepless nights and quiet worry. Who am I anymore? I whispered, my voice breaking in the stillness. No answer came, only the faint hum of the ceiling fan overhead. I had loved him. I had devoted myself entirely. And yet, I could barely recognize the person I had become. Sometimes I stood by the window, watching life move past without me. Children ran laughing down the streets, lovers walked hand in hand, strangers smiled at nothing. And I was only a shadow in my own life, a caretaker without an identity. But beneath the exhaustion, beneath the sadness, a faint ember flickered. A thought that whispered, perhaps I had not yet completely lost myself. Perhaps there was still a way back to who I used to be. And in that small, fragile hope, I felt the first stirrings of something I had almost forgotten, my own voice, my own life, waiting to be remembered. That evening, the house felt unusually still, as if it were holding its breath. The power had gone out, leaving only the dim yellow glow of a battery lamp in the living room. Outside, the city hummed faintly, distant traffic, a barking dog, the muffled laughter of neighbors drifting through open windows. I was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes in cold water, moving slowly, carefully, the way I had learned to do everything over the years. That's when I heard his voice. It wasn't raised. It wasn't angry. It was relaxed, almost light. The kind of tone he used before the accident, when he joked with friends late into the night. I paused, a plate still in my hands, and listened without meaning to. She does everything, he said with a short laugh. From lifting me to feeding me. I don't even have to ask. There was a brief pause. A response from the other end of the phone I couldn't hear. He continued, his voice softer now, almost careless. What choice do I have? She's been here 5 years. She's not really my wife anymore, more like a free servant. The words struck me one by one, each sharper than the last. Free. Servant. My knees weakened, and I leaned against the counter to keep from falling. The room felt suddenly too small, the air thick and heavy in my lungs. 5 years of early mornings and sleepless nights flashed before my eyes, every sacrifice, every silent tear, every promise I'd made to myself to stay strong. I wanted to believe I'd misheard him. I waited for him to laugh it off, to say something that would undo the damage. But he didn't. She won't leave, he added quietly. Where would she even go? Something inside me cracked. The plate slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor, the sound sharp and final. Inside the room, his voice stopped. The call ended abruptly. Out, irritation creeping into his tone. I couldn't answer. I stood frozen, staring at the broken pieces scattered across the tiles, white fragments glistening under the weak light, reflecting my face back at me in pieces. My chest burned, and my heart pounded so loudly I thought it might give me away. I walked slowly to the sink, turning on the tap to wash my trembling hands. The water ran red where a shard had cut my finger, but I barely felt it. The pain inside was deeper, sharper, impossible to ignore. In that moment, everything shifted. The love I thought I was protecting revealed its true shape, not devotion, not gratitude, but entitlement. And as the blood swirled down the drain, one thought echoed in my mind, heavy and unavoidable. I had given him my life. And to him, I was nothing more than a convenience. I cleaned the broken plate, wrapped the shards in old newspaper, and swept the floor as if nothing had happened. My hands moved on their own, trained by years of routine, while my mind felt far away, floating somewhere between disbelief and pain. From the other room, I could hear the faint hum of the fan and the rhythmic sound of his breathing, steady and unaware. When everything was finally quiet, I slipped into the bathroom and closed the door softly, careful not to make a sound. The light above the mirror flickered once before settling, casting a pale glow over my face. I gripped the edge of the sink and stared at my reflection. My eyes looked hollow, red-rimmed, as if they had been crying for years and only now realized it. The tears came without warning. I covered my mouth with my hand to keep from sobbing out loud. My shoulders shook, my breath came in broken pieces, and my chest ached with a pain I didn't know how to name. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cold tiles, knees pulled tightly to my chest, feeling smaller than I ever had before. Images replayed in my mind like a cruel film I couldn't stop. Carrying him from bed to wheelchair. Feeding him when my own stomach growled. Staying awake through the night while the city slept. Selling my jewelry, canceling my dreams, saying no to my own life again and again. Free servant. The words echoed, louder now in the silence. Was it really nothing? I whispered to the empty room. Was I nothing? I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who laughed easily, who dreamed without fear, who believed love meant partnership. Somewhere along the way, I had folded myself smaller and smaller, until there was barely anything left to see. Outside the small bathroom window, a distant train horn sounded, long and lonely. Life was moving forward, carrying everyone else with it, while I remained trapped in this moment, this choice, this pain. Forehead against my knees and let the tears fall freely now. No one could hear me. No one needed to know. I had learned long ago how to suffer quietly. But beneath the heartbreak, another feeling began to surface, soft at first, almost frightening. Anger. Not the loud, explosive kind. The quiet kind that settles deep in your bones. The kind that asks difficult questions. The kind that refuses to disappear. As I wiped my face and slowly stood up, I caught my reflection one last time. And for the first time in years, I didn't just see exhaustion. I saw someone standing at the edge of a decision, one that would change everything that came next. Morning arrived quietly, as if the world was giving me space to think. A pale light slipped through the curtains, soft and uncertain, touching the edges of the room without asking permission. The city outside was waking up, distant footsteps on concrete, the clink of a milk bottle being set down, the low call to prayer echoing faintly through the air. I sat on the edge of the bed, listening, breathing, letting the silence settle inside me. For the first time in years, my thoughts weren't racing toward what he needed next. They were on me. I went through the motions of the morning slowly. I helped him sit up, adjusted the pillows behind his back, handed him his medicine with a glass of water. Our fingers brushed, and he pulled his hand away almost immediately, distracted, uninterested. There was no apology. No thank you. Just expectation. Something inside me shifted, not sharply, not painfully, but with a calm certainty that surprised me. Later, while he slept, I stood by the window and watched the street below. Women swept their doorsteps, children hurried to school with oversized bags bouncing on their backs, life moving forward in small, determined steps. I pressed my palm against the glass and felt a strange sense of distance, as if I'd been watching this world from underwater. Love without respect is not love. The thought arrived fully formed, steady and unshakable. I realized then that my decision wasn't about punishment or revenge. It wasn't about making him understand my pain. It was about recognizing my own worth, something I had ignored for far too long. When he woke again, he looked at me with mild irritation. "Where's my breakfast?" he asked. "I'll make it," I replied, my voice even. But inside, I was already planning something else. That afternoon, I sat at the small table with a notebook I hadn't touched in years. I wrote down phone numbers. Old names. A social worker I'd once spoken to at the hospital. A distant cousin in another city. I didn't stop. Fear was there, but it no longer ruled me. I looked at him across the room, slumped in his chair, his eyes fixed on the television, and I felt something unexpected, clarity. Not hatred. not even sadness. Just the understanding that love should never require you to disappear. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in warm gold, I whispered the words to myself like a promise. I choose me. And for the first time in 5 years, the future didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a door, finally opening. The morning was soft, almost gentle, as if the world itself wanted to make this goodbye easier. Light filtered through the thin curtains, painting the room in pale gold. Outside, the city stirred slowly, bicycle bells, a vendor calling out his vegetables, children running along the cracked pavement, but inside, the apartment was quiet. For the first time in years, it felt like my own. I moved carefully through the familiar routines, preparing his breakfast and arranging his medications. The wheelchair was ready, the bed adjusted, every detail accounted for. But this morning, my hands moved not out of obligation or habit, but with purpose. Every motion carried the weight of the decision I had made, the choice to reclaim my life without making a scene. He looked at me from the chair, his eyes half-lidded, half asleep. Are you upset? He asked, confusion tinting his voice. I smiled faintly, not a smile for him, but a reassurance for myself. I'm okay, I said softly. Everything will be fine. I had arranged for a professional caregiver to come later in the day, someone trained, reliable, and capable of giving him the attention he needed. His care would continue, but it would no longer consume me. The thought brought a strange calm, a quiet satisfaction that I had done this responsibly, without anger, without drama. I packed my few belongings into a small bag, the clothes I had set aside months ago for a future I hadn't dared to imagine. Each item felt like a piece of me being reclaimed. I placed them by the door and took a deep breath, listening to the familiar sounds of the apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards, the soft rhythm of his breathing. Goodbye, I whispered, not loud enough for him to hear, not because he wouldn't notice, but because this wasn't about proving anything. I opened the door, feeling the cool morning air brush against my face. The streets outside were already alive with movement, the smell of fresh bread from a corner bakery, the distant call of a street vendor, the laughter of children chasing a stray dog. Life continued, as it always did. And for the first time in years, I was part of it. I walked slowly, deliberately, each step steady. My heart felt lighter, my shoulders freer, as if every burden I had carried had been left behind in that apartment. There was no shouting, no confrontation, no anger, only the quiet dignity of a woman reclaiming herself. And as the city swallowed me into its rhythm, I realized something powerful: leaving wasn't an end. It was the beginning of a life I had almost forgotten existed, and this time, it was mine. The city felt different that morning. The sun spilled over the rooftops in golden streaks, the air crisp with a promise of new beginnings. Birds chirped loudly from the wires above, and the scent of fresh bread from a nearby bakery drifted faintly through the street. I walked slowly along the pavement, my bag light, my steps steady. For the first time in years, I felt the air around me, breathing not for him, not for duty, but for myself. I found a quiet bench in a small park, tucked between flowering shrubs and a narrow footpath. The soft rustle of leaves accompanied the distant laughter of children playing. I sat, letting the warmth of the sun settle on my shoulders. My hands, once so worn and tender from endless care, rested comfortably in my lap. For a long moment, I simply watched the world move, alive and free, and realized I had never truly seen it this way before. I thought about the past 5 years, the nights I spent awake, the meals I skipped, the dreams I put away like fragile glass. I remembered the heartbreak, the silence, the words that cut deeper than any knife. And yet, I also remembered my own strength, the quiet resilience that had carried me through when everything else seemed to fail. Love, I realized, is not measured by sacrifice alone. Love without respect, love that erases the self, is not love at all. I had thought I was giving everything for love. But in truth, I had been giving myself away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to recognize. Today, I reclaimed that. I spoke softly to the empty park, as if the wind itself could carry my words. I didn't abandon anyone. I saved myself. The statement was simple, yet it rang in the quiet air with power I had not felt in years. The world around me continued its rhythm, vendors setting up their stalls, neighbors greeting one another, the hum of life going on. And for the first time I was part of it. Not as a shadow, not as a caregiver defined by duty, but as a woman whole, capable, and free. I rose from the bench, brushing the dust from my kurta, letting the sunlight fall on my face. My reflection in a shop window caught my eye. The same chestnut brown hair, streaked with silver, the same hands, now steady, strong. And I smiled, not because I had someone beside me, but because I had myself. This is my story, and my message is simple: love is not loss. Love is not self-erasure. True love begins when you honor your own worth. And sometimes, saving yourself is the greatest act of love you can give.